Hello, everybody. My name is Salas. Um, like it's written here, Salas Sanchez Benazor is my full name. I'll be your mentor for these sessions. Let me tell you a little bit about me. Um, I'm a software developer. I started developing only 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 3.5 years ago. So I am actually the product of a coding bootcamp. So I started in many ways like just like you started. So didn't know much about coding, went online, went on Code Academy, started practicing, and I got myself accepted in a coding bootcamp. 3 months later, I had a project. I had some more confidence and I got a job as a developer. And here I am 2 years later, 2.5 years later, helping you out to start with your coding experience. So it's good to be here and I hope I'm going to be helpful. This seminar series, this course that you're taking is a front-end development course. So we're going to start with the very basic front-end concepts, and the very first concept or the very first language that you're going to learn is called HTML. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, which basically means it's a language that basically is text that is marked up, literally meaning adding extra resources to the basic text to enrich it somehow. But basically, it's just text, as you'll see. Don't be worried if things get a little bit confusing at the beginning. First introductions are always weird, and don't worry if it doesn't make sense to start with. Hopefully I'll be able to clarify some things, and the more you play with it, the more confident you'll get. But for now, just, sit back, relax, and just try to get a clear idea of the basic concepts. I am going to stop at some points in the hour to help you to answer some of your questions. So if you see here, there is a live chat in the next to the video where I'm talking, and once in a while I'll stop and I'll look at what you've written there, and I'll try to answer some of your questions. So if you have questions, just go and write them on the live chat, and I'll do my best to get to them. And I will stop. I will designate some time to answer questions. So don't worry if I don't get to them immediately. I'll try to get them at some point in the hour. Okay, so that's the introduction. My name is Salas, so you can call me Salas if you want. We're going to talk about HTML today. Very basic initial introduction to HTML. Sorry, I keep on changing tabs. For now, nothing that's on the screen is relevant to what I'm saying. I just can't let go of my mouse. Okay, so let me start now by opening my text editor. What is a text editor? A text editor is basically a tool that we use to, here we go, is a tool that we use to edit text. So with code, which is basically just a bunch of files in different languages, we use some tools, a text editor to keep track of our changes and to see our project in code. This is Atom. So the text editor that I'm using for this class is going to be Atom, which is the one that's recommended in the lecture, in the exercises and all the Codecademy course that you're taking. So this way you'll see it in action. To open a project, of course, you go to File and Open. In this case, it's taking a little moment. Okay, so in this case, I have my projects folder. Let me go all the way to the desktop. Okay, my desktop is pretty clean. I may or may not have cleaned it up for the purposes of this seminar. I have a projects folder on my desktop where I save all my coding projects. This is a good practice. Projects folder, or SRC for source, is another usual name for this project. In this folder, you should have the different folders for each of the projects. So this way it's all organized. You always know which folder all your code is at, and it'll just make your life easy if you stay organized. In any case, I have this week 1 project, which has several files in it, but I'm just gonna open the whole folder, which is containing all the files. I'm going to use this little project that is based on the exercise project of the first week for the course, to demonstrate to you the different concepts that are covered in this week's material. You'll see that these files have an .html at the end of them. That's basically the file extension. That's called the file extension, and it's a way of telling whoever is going to take care of this file, or whatever program is going to try to interpret this file, that this is an HTML file. So what part of the computer is going to read HTML files? Well, it turns out that the browser is that tool. A browser is an HTML reader. That's the most basic way of thinking of the browser. I'm going to be using Chrome, and when we open an HTML file like this one, let me right click, and I can go to here, copy full path. I copy it, go back to the browser, new tab, paste the full path. What's the full path? The full path is basically it's an address, is the location of that file, in this case index.html, in my computer. In this case, is my computer because I'm taking it from my computer like you just saw. So if I click here, enter, this is basically rendering, the browser is now rendering the HTML file that I just showed you here. Okay, it's as simple as that. We're going to be playing with HTML files in this text editor, but we could be using any other text editor, and then we have a window in the browser, which is Chrome, that points in the address here. The URL is another word for it. That means Uniform Resource Locator. Resource locator, you see, it's just an address. It's just telling the browser where this file is in my computer, and it's rendering it. This is the HTML interpreted by the browser, which is text, just normal text. But why is it hypertext markup? Why is it marked up? It's marked up because you have some text here that is bigger, darker, this text that has a link to another section, there's a picture, there's tabs, So it's not just plain text. It's text, but it's marked up with other features. And that's all that HTML is. Hypertext Markup Language. That's all it means. Okay. One quick thing. We have now seen this path here, this URL, is pointing to a file in my computer, right? So in this case, the server is local. What does that mean? Okay, think of the browser as this tool that is ready to receive HTML files and interpret them, render them pretty on the screen like browsers do. Okay, so the browser is just waiting for HTML files. The server, like the name itself says, is what's serving those files to the browser, right? The server sends over, in this case, HTML files to the browser. This file here is in my computer. So the server is local. Local because it's here. It's my computer. This is all happening within my computer. If I go to another file, another tab, say for instance, this is Wikipedia page that I was reading. This is the URL, so it's the same thing. It's a resource locator. Is uniform because it's following certain conventions so that, you know, this kind of URLs are easily identifiable by any kind of browser. But this is basically doing the same thing as what this address here is doing. Basically saying, this is where the file is. HTTPS is a protocol for sending files from remote servers. So instead of being my own computer that's serving, that is giving the HTML file and everything else to my browser, it's remote, it's somewhere else. And that's where the World Wide Web comes in, right? That's the internet. Remote service serving files to all the different browsers, your computer, my computer, and so on. Anyway, so I just wanted to make a distinction in between the browser and the server. The server being the reader, the interpreter of HTML and JavaScript and other things, but mostly for today, HTML files, and the server being whatever source that HTML file is coming from. We are going to look at HTMLs coming from remote servers. So we're going to look at pages that are available for everybody to plug into via the URL. And we're also going to look at my local server because I have this file that I want to be playing with. Okay, that's the setup. Let's go into HTML files and their basic structure. I'm going to go back to Atom, which is the text editor, and I want to show you the basic structure of an HTML file. First of all, you'll see that when you start an HTML file, it always has to have this tag here, which is the doctype. Doctype HTML. I have this other example of an HTML file. Here, it also starts with this. Every HTML file is going to have at the very top, this tag, the doc type. This is a convention so that the browser, in this case Chrome, knows when it gets the file, it looks at the top and it says doc type HTML. So that's telling the browser, boom, what's coming is an HTML file. So be ready to interpret it with everything you know about HTML. I'm talking about the browser as if it were a person, but I hope you understand that obviously this is a computer program, non-self-conscious computer program interpreting given the rules that are programmed into it. So when the browser receives a doc type HTML file, it's like, oh, okay, that's what I'm getting. This is how I'm going to read it. By the way, this is what this Wikipedia page is about. The document type declaration is what I'm talking about. So the first line of HTML files is this doc type tag that tells the browser or whatever interpreter what kind of HTML, but that it is HTML, and more specifically what kind of HTML the file is in. Because I'm sure you've heard about HTML5, right? There's an HTML5 because there's an HTML1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and each of those have different standards. Because all of this, given that we want browsers all over the world to be able to more or less behave in similar ways so that we can have this common understanding in the internet for sending files and viewing web pages, we need to have some standards, which is what this association does. W3C is setting the standards for the open web platform. So basically, there are some people who decide the basic ways in which, in this case, since we're talking about this, HTML is going to behave, basic syntax, what to do, what not to do, so that the browser knows how to interpret it. Okay, so this is all just the document type declaration, the doc type that I was talking about, is a basic pointer to saying the file is going to follow the basic standards for, in this case, HTML5, which is the current version of HTML that is the rule. And those rules or standards of what to expect are set by this W3C association. Before I go on, I want just to say that if you go to my GitHub, which is GitHub/Salad Sanchez, I've created a repo there, Codecademy Mentoring, and what I'm going to do is for each week, I'm going to make sure I include the list of resources or websites that either I mention when I'm talking to you or other things that may be helpful, like further reading, for you to access. So in this case, I started compiling this list for this week's class, and I've included this, for instance, the Wikipedia article, the document type declaration, in case you want to read more about all of that. Let me actually include this one as well so that you have it and you can read all about the standards and about how everything is actually very organized. Oh, look, I already have it here. Never mind. Okay. So just FYI, all of these resources that I will be mentioning, I'm going to put them here in this repo for you to access at any point. Okay. I don't see any questions, so I'm just going to assume that everything I'm saying is so clear then I'm just going to move on. We have the doc type. Let's go back to the basic example. This is the home HTML file that I'm showing you here. It's super basic. It basically has no content, or very little content. Is what you're seeing here. Basically, a very plain HTML page. Okay, all it says is you're on the home page. Very informative. Anyway, so this is the file that we are seeing in that browser page that I just showed you. It has the doc type HTML required for the browsers to interpret it right, and then everything else is going to be within these two tags, HTML, and at the end another HTML tag, a tag that says HTML in it with the /. Okay, let me just write it here. You see this pair of tags here, right? It's this little chevron or whatever you would call this with the name of the tag. In this case, it's HTML. And then whatever goes in the middle, in this case, everything else in the file goes in between this initial opening tag and this final closing tag. The closing tag is closing because it has this / here. So HTML tags, in this case, this is the most general HTML tag that there is because it just says everything in between these two tags is HTML. As the opening tag and the closing tag. I'm going to delete this from here because this opening tag is closed by this very bottom here HTML tag. Whoop. Closing tag. Okay? So that's the other basic thing that any HTML file is going to have. Closing HTML tag, opening and closing HTML tag. And then there are two main parts within the file. One is the head, opening tag for the head here, closing tag for the head here. And the other is the body, opening tag, closing tag, okay? It's very important for any HTML work that you keep track of those tags, and every time you open a tag, you make sure you close it. Otherwise, it throws everything and the reader, the browser, doesn't know how to interpret it, okay? So, head and body. Let me quickly, because I won't have time to go into more detail, but let me quickly say that the head does not really render on the page. Look at what it says here. There's a meta, chart set, and a title. There's nothing here about that. This is the head because it has metadata about the page. What is metadata? Data is what the page contains, right? This is the data of the page. Where it says you're on the home page, that's the content, that's the data of the page. The metadata is just telling the browser information about the page that's not necessarily content of the page. So in this case, for instance, the chart set is telling the browser how to encode the content. This has to do with how the browser interprets what we see as, in this case, English writing, and how it interprets further down into bytes and into all of that. Probably we don't need to go into that detail right now. There are different ways of interpreting it and breaking down the English letters. This is just telling it, do it like this. Doesn't matter. right now. The title, for instance, is another piece of metadata. The title is what goes here. You see here at the top of the tab where it says Home HTML. That's the default. I haven't given my file a title, so the default is that it's just going to give me the file name, which is in this case Home HTML. I actually can change this. Let's say the title is, well, since this is the home page, I'm going to give it the very original name, homepage. I'm going to save. By the way, see this little circle here? The fact that that's a circle now means that I've made a change on the file and I haven't saved it. So click Control S or Command S, depending on whether you're on a Windows or on a Mac. Command S, boom, that circle disappears, and that means that I've saved all my changes. Then I can go to the browser again, and I refresh, which you can do by clicking, or you can do Command R for refresh, and boom, homepage. So that's the title, okay? This is the kind of information that you're gonna see in the head. There's gonna be a lot more information in more sophisticated pages, but for now, that's the kind of information. And then there's the body, opening tag, closing tag. And then in the body is where the magic happens, okay? Let me go to the index HTML page. Also the same structure, HTML tag, at the end, closing HTML tag, I'm closing the body. The body contains all the information, all the content, sorry, and then there's the head that in this case contains the title and a char set specification. Anyway, menu. This is the page with the basic file that I have opened in my text editor. Let's move on. I don't want to waste too much time in this because the details of the tools that we have are more interesting. Let's see. There is a lot of things that can be done with just plain HTML, which is what we have here today. One of the basic tags, a tag again is this kind of thing. In this case, the nav tag, open, close. One of the basic tags is the div tag. The div tag is basically creating a box where things happen. So most things in an HTML file are going to happen in a div. It only basically encapsulates things, doesn't really create much more than just a box where you put things. Okay, so we'll see it in action, but it's always in the background, and it helps for organizing things. By the way, before I move on, do you see this file has everything lined to the right, to the left edge of the file? That's really hard to read, really awkward. We can use indentation to make the structure of the file way more explicit. So for instance, we have the head here, opening, closing tag for the head. And these two things here are actually inside the head as children of the head. So the element that's outside, in this case the head, is the parent of the elements, in this case this meta tag and the title tag. Those are the children of the element head. They are the children just merely because they're inside of it, okay? There's nothing magic about it. One way in which HTML files help you see the structure of the file And this is merely just so that the reader, the human reader, has a better and easier time understanding what's going on, is by using indentation. Indentation means that normally we have the parent at one level, and all the children are going to be indented once, in this case 2 spaces, but to the right, so that you have this visual indicator of the structure, of the hierarchy of the elements on the page, okay? So if I do this, all the indentation is now in place. So you see that the body, for instance, is on its own as being the furthest left, and then you have all the other elements indented once, and when you have elements that have children, the children of those elements are indented themselves, and so on and so forth. So now the structure of the file is way more clear. Okay, let's see. For instance, let's start with this element. H stands for header. H1 means the biggest kind of header. H2 is going to be slightly smaller. There's up to 6 elements, headers. So we can have H2, but we can have H3 or H4 or H5 as well, and H6. So, okay, let me show you one more thing so that we can do everything here from this page. When you're on the browser, you can right click and go to inspect or inspect element. If you click, you're going to see what's called the console, the developer tools, and one of these tabs, there's different tabs here with different kinds of information, but let's not worry about this now. Let's just worry about the elements tab. So right click, inspect element, or you can do also Command Shift C for the Apple, for the Mac. And what you see here is basically a copy of the HTML file that I have here in the text editor. Okay, so I'm going to just modify the HTML file here to show you the changes happening live instead of having to change from screen to screen. But it's basically the same thing, only that these changes here are going to not be permanent. So when I refresh, these changes are going to go away. Okay, so look, header. This is an H1 tag, opening, closing, and this is the content. 2 sandals, soups, and salads, okay? It's H1, so it shows this big. If I change this to well, I can change the content, of course. Changing content. Click enter, and you see the content has changed on the screen. I change it back. But what if I want to change, what if I want to add a tag, for instance? What if instead of H1, let me do it here. What if instead of H1 I have H6? I need to remember to change both opening and closing tags, and Control S or Command S to save it, and then I can go to the main page and Command R to refresh. Look, That's how small I went, okay? So headers, pretty easy, different sizes. Remember, H1 is the biggest, H6 is the smallest, and then you can play around with it. Then there's the P tag, like here you can see. A P stands for paragraph, so a P element is just a way of encompassing some text to make a paragraph. So a P element is going to show as a paragraph like this. You can have it be justified or not justified. In this case, it's justified. Then you can have like elements inside the text. So for instance, I can have a tag that's going to say make soups and salads strong. What does that mean? Strong just means bold. Let's change it here. Here you go. You see here is doing what I was trying to do, using the strong tag to make the, in this case, the word tomato bold. Refresh. If I right click, inspect element, it will automatically highlight in the code the section that we are talking about. So here you see strong tags in action. Strongs are going to make it bold. If I change it to EM, and in this case you see it actually changed it automatically, that the closing tag went to EM. So that's italics instead of bold. I can Control Z for reversing those changes. It goes back to bold because it's in strong in the original. What other tags do we have that are important? Okay, let's look at this list tag. There are two kinds of lists. This is a list, soups, salads, desserts. That's a list with bullet points. So it doesn't order them. It doesn't give them numbers. In this case, however, it's ordered because it has a 1, 2, 3. This is a second list here, okay? What's the difference in the code? This list is using the UL tag. The UL tag is UL because it's unordered list, okay? Easy to remember. And each line item, list item, each thing in the list is going to be inside a LI tag, the LI element being the list element, okay? So the UL list is unordered with the list elements appearing with, in this case, the default is a bullet point. There's ways of modifying this, which we'll see next week. But for now, we're just using the default styling, the styling being how this thing looks on the page. And then there's the OL list. What does OL stand for? Well, clearly, ordered list. And it's ordered because each LI element, LI meaning, remember, list item, open and closed here. Each LI element has a number, in this case, just a normal looking number. You can have it be a Roman numeral or a letter, and those are modifications that can be done with some changing of the settings. But this is the default. Those are the lists. What else is interesting about this? We can add a picture. Again, if I want to see where in the text, in the HTML file, this picture lives, right click, inspect. Boom, it highlights the line of code where that picture is being inserted. This is like one of the most powerful tools for exploring HTML files. Put your cursor on the element that you want to find in the code, right click, inspect, boom, it takes you there. To insert an image into an HTML page, we use the img tag, which clearly stands for image. The image tag looks like this. First of all, there's two interesting things about the image tag. One is that you'll see that it has no closing tag. So let me go back to my, so let me see. Okay, another trick. When you're in your text editor and you're like, oh, where is that element? Control F, okay? Control F or Command F is gonna pop out this Finder box, and you just click, you just type into it what you want to find. I think that we were in the salad image. So here, okay? What's interesting about this image tag? This is the complete tag and content. There is no closing tag, right? This is the opening tag, but every other tag that we've seen would have this as a closing tag, right? But there are some tags in HTML, and this is just something that you're just gonna have to know which ones are like this and which ones are not. Some tags don't require closing. So in the image tag, the image element is one of those elements where it requires no closing tag. So this is the complete element, just an opening tag. An opening tag plus one interesting bit of information, which is the src attribute. An attribute is some extra information that attaches to a tag. In this case, src means source, and in the case of the image tag, you have to include a source attribute. Why? Because you need to tell it where the image is. What image is it that we are including? And because it's not just text, you cannot just add it. So for instance, the strong tag here, right down here, has content. The content is text. So the content goes in between the opening tag and the closing tag. The image tag doesn't have text as its content. The image tag has an image as its content. So you need to not type it out, because otherwise it's going to interpret it as text, but you have to include it as a source attribute. And you, in this case, we're giving it a URL somewhere publicly available from a remote server that has a JPG file, which is the image that the browser will fetch and render in the spot where you have included this img tag, image tag. Okay, those are some of the basic tags that HTML has. If you go through the lectures, you'll have a more inclusive list. But I just want to talk about a couple other things, not just the different tags that all do something slightly different, but once you get the idea, it's pretty easy. And by the way, there are pretty good resources online for HTML tags. So for instance, say we want to learn about the UL HTML tag, UL being unordered list, right? So just use Google. Google is your friend, and just search for anything. You'll have a lot of information. UL HTML when it gets to it. This website, W3 Schools, they're pretty useful because they have very good basic, overviews of a lot of things. In this case, all the HTML tags. So you see, they give you an example. You can try it yourself if you want to. You click there and you'll open a window where you can modify it and see how it renders. They have a definition of usage. They tell you if the different browsers interpret it. This is because all the different browsers that I just told you are the interpreters of HTML. In theory, everybody should more or less do the same because of the standards that I talked about in the beginning, but there are some differences, and sometimes some browsers render certain things slightly different. So it tells you, and anyway, it goes into the detail of the tags, and it tells you how to use it. Here you have a really long list here on the left of all the different HTML tags and how they're used. So this is the W3 Schools is a very handy tool. I'm gonna include it, although I think I may have already included it. Anyway, yes, it's here in the list of resources, W3 Schools, because they're pretty handy. Okay. What I wanted to show you finally in this file, and then maybe we'll have time for something else before we run out of time, is that you can actually navigate. So basically you can use the HTML power to direct the user from one click to a different section of the page or a different page altogether, just by using HTML. So let's start with this very top navigation here. If I click home, I'm in the home page. Remember, that was this other file that I had here that was pretty basic. If I click menu, I go to this other page, which is the index.html file, which is this file that we've been working on. The way that you do this inside, when you're running local, when you're doing what we're doing, which is just typing the address of the local path for my file, is to use the anchor element. The A element is an anchor because you use it when you want to anchor a link to another page or another section to a piece of text on your main page. So in this case, the anchor element has this content, which is home or menu, and it's anchored. So basically this link that's here, in this case the home HTML or index HTML, is anchored to this word in this page, so that when I click, the href attribute is telling it to go to the index.html file. So that's what the anchor element is doing here. I can make the anchor to a file, home HTML in this case, index HTML in this case, or I can do what is happening here. Right click, inspect, boom. The anchor element is actually anchored to hashtag soups. What does that mean? A hashtag in HTML always means that it's referring to an ID of an element. So if you go to this div here, you see that this div, in this case, has an attribute, an ID attribute. An ID is an identifier, like in everywhere else, an ID attribute, and it's saying this div, the ID of this div is soups. So when I go up here and I say I'm gonna anchor this word here to this link, and it's gonna link to hashtag soups, that means it's going to go to wherever element in the page has soups as an ID. So if I'm here and I click soups, boom, it makes that element, soups, top of the page. It scrolls to that spot. Let's go back up. If I click salads, inspect, salads, what is it doing? The same thing, but for what element? The element that has as an ID salads. What is it? It's down here, ID salads. So when I click on salads, it's going to be, boom, down to the section of the page called salads is the ID. Salads is the ID for this whole div that is containing everything, in this case, about salads. Remember, you can choose whatever ID you want. So when you give an ID to an element, try to be clear, try to be helpful to the reader or to yourself next week when you come back to this and you're trying to understand what you wrote. Use your power to name things in a useful, clear way that's going to help you understand what's going on, okay? It would also work if I wrote ID FGDTH and then I went up here and instead of href to soups, I href to FGDTH. It would still work, okay? If I go to soups, boom, it still gives me this div at the top of the page. But this name is lame. It doesn't help you understand anything. It's going to be super confusing to remember what this means. So help yourself out. Use good names for things. You're going to never regret it. Okay, let me just use the last few minutes to show you this kind of tools that we've seen on a real page. Not that this page isn't real, but clearly it's pretty basic. Say we go, for instance, to this blog. This is just a software development blog that's pretty good. This guy knows how to write. Let me start from the beginning. I'm going to close this. So we have this page. Remember, if you want to bring out the developer console, the tools that we were just seeing earlier, you can right-click, inspect element, or you can do Command-Shift-C. And that brings up this box here to the left. My screen is not too big, so it kind of like I have to collapse it a little bit for you guys to see it. But it brings up the HTML, the source of this way more complex, way richer page. But it's basically the same thing. So let me just show you how it is the same thing in many ways. First of all, doctype HTML at the very top. Remember, this is just to tell what kind of file and what kind of HTML the browser is receiving. Then we have the HTML tag, HTML at the very beginning. And if we go all the way to the bottom, always the last thing on the page is going to be the closing tag for the HTML. What else is there? There's the head. Let me just collapse everything. There's the head and there's the body. Those two main sections of any HTML file, where the head contains all the metadata, so it's all information about the data on the page, loads of scripts and links and complex things that we don't have time to get into right now. But look, there's a title. Remember, the title is what goes here on the top of the tab. JoLM Software, in this case, I can change this to Salazon software. Boom, it changes it up here, okay? So it's the same thing, just slightly more with other extra things, but it's got the char set here to tell it what kind of encoding to use. Anyway, so that's the head. And then there's the body. What's in the body? Same things. There's divs, there's anchors, there's lists. Let me show you, for instance, read more. This is a link, right? Let me right click, inspect, so that it's gonna take me to the highlighted element on the page where that's happening. What is it gonna be? Well, as we said before, it's an anchor. It's an A element, an anchor. Why? Because it is anchoring this text, read more, to what? To an href, which is basically a link. The link being, in this case, this other page within his blog that contains whatever he wants to show us. But anyway, you can inspect many HTML pages, live HTML pages, and they're all basically building from the blocks that we've just seen during this hour. Okay, so I just wanted to show you that these tools are very basic. They're very important for you to know because they're the building blocks of every page out there. So it's a fun exercise actually to just go into any of these, whatever your favorite page is. I don't know that you would have a favorite page, but whatever pages you usually go to, and just do a right click, inspect. Sorry, that was not the right thing to click. Right click, inspect, and you'll see these elements and tags that you will know after this first week. So that's pretty exciting. Anyway, I think this is all we have time for because we only have 3 minutes left. But I hope this gives you an overview of the basic tools and the basic structure of an HTML file. Let me just remind you that if you go to my GitHub, Salad Sanchez is my name, and you'll see, I'm gonna make sure that this repo is in a pinned repo so you can actually see it straight away when you land here. And you have, I'm gonna include this list of resources there so you have access to them. Remember that you have the Slack channel with Codecademy mentors. They're able to help you and make use of your mentors every week. Your one-on-ones with your mentors are a very powerful tool to help you. I don't see any questions on the live chat, so I'm going to assume that you don't have questions. But by all means, we have 2 minutes left, so if you have any questions, now is the time. What else I wanted to say? Oh yeah, next week. Okay, you see the difference, right, between our amazing HTML, plain HTML website here with the pictures and the pretty plain looking text. The difference between this and this is pretty striking, right? What's the difference? Mainly that this website, in this case Joel's blog, has a lot of styling. That's using another language called CSS that helps you make things look different. Like you can change the fonts, you can change the color, you can change the background. You can do so many things that make pages look way better than this plain version, which looks like 1995. So that's what we're going to do next week. We're going to talk about styling and CSS and all the power that gives you. So hopefully that'll make your pages look slightly less old-fashioned. But anyway, that's something to look forward to. Thank you very much, and that's it for today. Have a good week. and see you next week.